Hello, welcome back to Garrison Talks. As always, it's Adam, joined here with Matt and Tyler. How we doing tonight?
Doing great.
We're doing, yeah, we're doing great. Been a busy day. Glad to sit down at work or after work and do a little painting and talk podcast with you guys. So those are who are
I've had
watching it on YouTube. I'm sorry I'm not making eye contact with you, but I will try next week.
Yeah.
It's the week leading up to
Okay, I
World.
gotta I gotta start printing stuff. Like I've got my printer for those of you on YouTube. I've got my 3D printer for Middle Earth that I've been printing a bunch of stuff for. That I gotta print those and get them all painted up. Um,
Oh, so they're not
But
official
how
models,
much?
Adam?
they are by the rules of Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game. They are illegal models as long as they can tell what they are, and it's kind of hard to not tell what an orc is. So
Yeah, the weird thing about
Okay.
that game is there's a good portion of the game that's actually not printed. Like they don't have for sale. They never made models for it. They exist,
well,
but they've actually never made models for them.
I was
How
like,
does that
Uh,
work?
the game is so old.
yeah, the game is so old. It's like the
Well,
game is
it's less
literally
that
probably 20 years old.
I think if I remember correctly, it's less that it's been never printed and more that it's out of print for like 20 years. So it's like half
There
the
are
stuff you can't even get.
right, and they don't make molds or casts for them anymore. So you just kind of go through the 3D printing community, and it's socially accepted. There's also like there's a handful. There's like five of them that they've actually never made models for.
Didn't
At
know
least that's
that.
what I've been told. Yeah, so they made rules for it and they just never actually finished production. I guess I don't know all the details, but someone on the podcast who's listening to this, if I'm wrong, correct me, leave us a comment.
I was like, if people are listening to this for like the minute and a half, maybe we just do a Middle Earth podcast too. But anyway, we're here to talk. We're here to talk Legion tonight.
Yeah, a game that
That's
has
right.
printed all their models.
Yeah,
That's
but
right.
like I can print models, and that's really cool. I really wish they'd let printed models, but that's a completely different conversation. Anyway, tonight we're gonna continue our Legion 201, 301. I don't remember what I called it last episode. Of how to play the game. We're gonna talk a bit more about mobility play, so what that looks like with if you're playing like a close range list, like closing the gap and flanking stuff like that. If you're playing like a gun line, talk a little bit about kiting and what that means. And then we'll talk a little bit about worlds and kind of like for some people, because I know a lot of people going to worlds, excuse me, are newer or not newer, but like haven't been to as many big tournaments as a lot of us have. So we'll talk a little bit about like what to expect for when you're going there, what to bring physically, because there's a lot of extra things you can bring that makes tournaments really feel comfortable, and then talk a little bit about what we're bringing to worlds. But yeah, as always, Indie Opens coming up June 7th and 8th. I remembered it this time. Um,
Woo!
out here in Indianapolis, as always, given it's the Indie Open. So keep your eye on that. We've got the player pack up. We've got start on prize support there. So yeah, just keep your eye out on that if you're in the Legion Discord.
And
Yep.
another Garrison plug is if I don't mention anything or we don't mention anything about this later, which we might. I wrote an article about worlds, and so we might reiterate some things in the article, but there could be a thing or two that we don't mention here. So it's definitely worth going and giving a read. There's also going to be links in that article to the important documents that AMG wants you to read before you go. So if we don't cover those as well, definitely go give that a look.
Yeah. All right. So with all of our plugs out of the way, talk a little bit about mobility play. In terms of mobility play, what are we like? So I already said at the start, but like for a couple definitions, really quickly. Kiting, because like that's kind of one that I think people don't necessarily see unless they're millennials like me that play a ton of League of Legends. Um, can you guys give me a definition for what kiting means to you when we're talking about mobility?
Well, as someone who's
I would
younger
say
than me,
it's
I'll let Tyler start. Just
well.
throwing
I
that
would
plug out there.
say fun fact. I've never actually used a real kite, but anyways, so I
Don't.
think kiting is well. I know it's probably not an actual related term, but I was just throwing the fun fact in there. No, I I think this mostly applies to gun lines with kiting, and it's not really something that like any sort of like skew list would apply to. But what it is effectively is that you're treating range bands like you're going to maximums of range bands, trying to stay out of a threat band of another unit. So what that kind of looks like is if there's a force user on the other side, if you are exactly at range 3 of a force user, they can't double move and force push you into them. So if you are using your army to basically create kind of like a bubble around this force user where everybody's just at range 3, um, then you're like playing it safe that way. You're staying out of the threat band. This also can work at like if you're playing a range 4 gun line, just basically staying right at range 4. And if they have guns on the other side of the table that are range 3, they can't move shoot you back. And so you're kiting in that sense too, where you're basically minimizing shots coming back at you while also getting off shots towards your opponent.
Yeah, I had to look it up, and it actually is related to like flying a kite. That kind of that caught my attention a little bit, but yeah. So it's literally based off of flying a kite. Which fun
Fun
little
fact:
tidbit.
some of
I
us
figured
actually
it's kind of
have flown a
straightforward.
kite.
Man, you're
Yeah.
old.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
so
I was gonna say back
I
in
know.
like 17, what again?
Back in my day, we used to
Yeah.
attach keys to try and power our houses.
Yep. Uncle Ben.
Wait, so it does get a little it does get a little janky on the tabletop, in terms of like physical play because it's so hard to sit exactly at certain ranges like that. But it's generally like as you're saying, like kind of the point of kiting is to shoot without getting shot, or like shoot without being in danger. It's kind of like the bottom line of it, right? Um, because like I'm trying to think of like the right way to phrase this. Because there's matchups where your strength, of course, is like my train of thought is completely baffled by the school of
That's
Church.
okay.
I
I'll
don't
jump
know
in.
why.
You're doing. I see where you're going with that, Adam. It's good. One of the things that I think of with mobility and kiting, particularly, we're going to see a need for this at Worlds with two lists. I mean, obviously, Tyler touched on force users, but the other two that I could think of that are going to probably be at Worlds and maybe other events near you is the Wookiee Battle Force that wants to take its entire army and run at you. At some point, you kind of have to control when that engagement is going to happen. Like Wookiees are just going to get to you. It's going to happen. It's a matter of when and if you can get enough shots to them before they get there. So kiting is a good way to do that, to be able to shoot at them and move back a little bit, or shoot at them and just at the range where they can't charge you, or whatever that needs to look like. The other example is Ewoks. Ewoks, both of them just want to run straight at you, get in melee, and just tear you to pieces best they can. So those are big examples of that. The other kind of example that I can think of for like mobility and kiting is you can almost do that a little bit if you out gunline your opponent. Like I think a lot of times that Tyler's done this in games to me, like when we play, because often his CIS army has range 4 and I have 3, so he's going to keep a lot of his B1s at range 4 to be able to shoot to where I have to move into him. And it's essentially just maximizing that range band. But that there's some mobility play in that too, and a lot of higher end players are going to understand those and be able to capture that movement and keep it at the maximum range to be able to make you have to be the aggressor rather than them.
Okay, so when I think about kiting, I generally think of it in like League of Legends terms, as I said, where kiting is generally when you are running away from someone while hitting them still. But like I guess in Legion, it's not necessarily you have to be running away from what I'm gathering. From what you guys are saying, because it's like you can just sit at range 4. You don't necessarily have to back up, right?
Well, I mean, there can be backing up. I think I've referenced this like a couple streams, or not streams, podcasts now, and I think that Luke Cook versus Lila Claire, the World Tournament from last year, is actually a good example where Luke Cook just absolutely played his range bands perfect, and would when Lila's Black Suns would charge into range, he would shoot with his whatever unit and then back up and keep the distance basically. And even though that
Yeah.
Lila's list was a double moving quite a bit, uh, the shoot single move back was keeping enough of a distance to where there was enough rounds to where Lila eventually took enough wounds and Luke pulled ahead. So it's it is running back in a sense in that scenario. Um, but granted, that's against like one of the most aggressive armies you could possibly face in Legion. So you probably don't need to go that extreme with it most of the time. But I think you could definitely see yourself running, quote unquote.
Okay, so I should say I understand like you definitely are going to be backing up sometimes, but like I think you don't necessarily need to all the time, right? Like because you just play your range bands.
You
And be
can. There's
okay with it.
examples of it. Like I think that's a good example, like you said, is just trying to keep that distance.
Yeah. All right. So when do you? So like we know how to kite now. But like when do you decide to kite? Like when is it important to kite versus close the gap and play the objective? Like I think kind of answered my own question there with saying play the objective, but
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, I think clones is a good example of this. Like, I kite against clones all the time because they don't really have a good range 3+ presence. The range 3 guns are good. I mean, anything 4 or more. And, oftentimes I play armies to where I can simply stay out of their range 3 band because of a fire supporting units. Those are often range 3 units. And so those are obviously very, very deadly. Also, just in general, like a Z6 shot from a phase 1 or phase 2, backed with aims and surges and stuff like that, can be very, very effective at forcing saves. And so, just understanding that their efficient units are all at range 3, and just knowing I want to stay at range 4 plus as long as I possibly can.
so yeah. So when do you decide that it's time that you can't stay at range 4 though? Like
I,
what's your identifier
you
there?
want to
Is there
you want
one?
to yeah, I mean, you just want to do it as long as you possibly can because the less they're shooting, the less they're killing, and frankly, in most gun or in most clone matchups, the more they kill, the more they win.
That's true. Yeah, because
Yeah, and
they win
I
by
think
shooting and not
Tyler would
dying.
probably I think Tyler you'd probably agree. The biggest indicator for me is usually like what time do you have left in the objective? Like if you're playing breakthrough and you know that they're going to be able to score at least one, you have to give yourself time to at least either eliminate them or be able to book it to get one in as well. Or if it's intercept, you got to be able to get to that middle to close on round 6 if you need. And so whatever that indicating that time.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's just a really interesting topic, just because it's very very layered. I think, and it's really really game dependent. Like if you're 3 moves away from a KP, you're gonna need to spend at least 2 turns getting to the middle key position, which means that you might have to close a little sooner. Or you could find yourself a single move away from a KP while still kiting and things like that, which means you can do your dive a lot later. It's just going to come on a game by game basis, and you just got to decide when it's best.
I was like, um, do you have any like certain like points? Because I'm asking you specifically, Tyler, because Matt and I are both psychopaths and that we can't play static gun lines. Um, is there
I play
really any like
short range.
we? Yeah,
Yeah.
short range is fun. Um, it's are there any like specific tells for like when you need to like what are your like it sounds like you have rules for like how far you have to back up, how when you start playing the objective, when you're kiting, etc., because it's like within like 2 moves of an objective. Like I guess it is on a game by game basis, but like is there a general rule of thumb that you follow?
Yeah, I think a big one is that I never back up more than I absolutely have to. And what I mean by that is like if you are trying to kite really really hard and you find yourself in a scenario where you like keep shooting moving back, you could find yourself where it's like, oh, like the last 3 turns of the game, I'm gonna have to double move every turn just to get to the middle key position or to the middle intercept or whatever the case may be. And that's when the other army would basically completely negate everything you did in the previous turns by kiting them, because you're gonna have basically just have to put your head down and run straight into them. So you want to make sure that you can more or less establish a position to where it's not going to take you any more than the absolute maximum, I think, of three activations or three actions, really. Um, that's what I meant to say. Not three activations. Three actions to do whatever sort of objective you want. So whether that's three move actions to get to a key position, whether that's three moves to get into a breakthrough, whether whatever.
Could be like two moves, move, and tap a vap or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
stuff like that. All right, so just three actions in general. Okay.
I wouldn't advise more than that. There are scenarios where you can get away with it if there's like a really really good line of sight blocking piece, and you can basically just negate attacks for even longer. Like on a breakthrough scenario, like you can probably get away with only taking two actions if it's in a good enough spot. I say three just because most armies would get adhered to its suppression, and it
Yeah.
basically kind of guarantees that one of those two activations you can afford getting suppressed.
Yeah, I mean that actually makes a lot of sense to me. That's probably something I need to try out when I'm actually playing gun lines. But on the flip side, there are more aggressive lists, kind of like as kind of alluded to, the Wookiees and the Woks that want to play more for closing the gap. Um, so from the reverse side of that, what are you looking for in kind of both avoiding and for what you want as the list that has to close the gap? Like, what is the goal, and like what is like rule of thumbs there, like just in general? I think so. I'll say for me,
Yeah, why
the
don't
number one thing. Oh, just, I don't know if our connection's bad or whatever, but yeah, I'll say number one thing for me is if you're playing these close range lists and like you're okay, like and you're trying to be the aggressor, understanding that there's the phrase acceptable casualties for a reason. In that you're going to lose something on the way there. You're not going to be able to get in and not take risks and not lose anything when you have this close range army. Because what you're playing for is you're essentially saying, okay, I've got 500, 600 points that are going to make it into you, maybe. Like at most, like worst case scenario. This 500 to 600 points that is getting into you will absolutely decimate you. And understanding that I think is really really important. And it's both from both sides because it's you're playing the game of okay, can I get there fast enough, or will my opponent attrition me too fast? Whereas when you're on the other side, it's just vice versa, right?
Yeah, I also feel like those sort of units or those sort of scenarios, like um, you can basically just force your opponent into a position without even killing anything. Just like a physical position on the board to where they're going to have to overcome so much just to come back. And so, you can take advantage of your aggressive units or what have you and not even necessarily kill stuff with them just by forcing your opponent into a terrible positional disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of goes for like tempo plays and everything too, and like that kind of like relates to tempo, which is another topic. I think we touched a little bit on it, but like in general, just keeping the tempo up because that's how you control a game.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Matt, what
yeah,
about you?
My internet's a little wonky, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Is this better?
yeah,
Yeah, yep, sounds
yeah,
good.
we're good.
Okay. Yeah, sweet. So I tried to move to a different spot, so hopefully it's a little bit better. But yeah, so I think for me, like, I think I'm the opposite end. Like, I'm not usually the one, like Adam said, I play close range, so I'm not usually kiting. I'm usually holding my position to try to do the opposite, to move into you, and that's why I think mobility is so important to me. Is because, like, I play Sabine a lot. I play higher mobility units that want to get into you or at least get close. And so positioning is key. And I think part of that comes down to planning it turns.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think units that take advantage of this sort of like there's archetypes that will like uh, kind of gunline and kite. I think at the same time in a weird way. I think like droids with a
Experimental
couple
droids.
sprinkled in. Well, not necessarily experimental droids. I mean, they kind of do it well, but the list that do it better, I think, are droids with Geonosians and honestly Blizzard Force a little bit. Blizzard Force is a little less gunline potent than the Geonosian list, but the idea basically is that there are some lists that are able to kind of flex into both, where you have a gun line like a droid gun line. You can have some magnas, some sniper units, and you can basically push a unit or push an army into a position to where they might have an optimal approach while kind of receiving fire. But Geonosians or like speeder bikes and things like that can absolutely tear up a flank or something like that, which might be a good segue. But it might be, you'll have units like that that are amazing at basically taking advantage of what the rest of the gun line is kind of forcing you to do.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. No, I agree with all of that, and it's like so. One of the things that you're mentioning with mobility is, I do think mobility matters a lot for these terms of like closing the gap and flanking, because I don't think you need much more than like the normal list, because like as a rule of thumb, you can go with a like two speed two moves from a small base unit is kind of like the standard, right? Because that's all of your core basically. Um, and if you are faster than that, you will be able to catch up to your opponent. And I think that's the most important part in the terms of like these closing the gap lists and playing with mobility, like you said, is a thing to just think about. Because you can't really close the gap if you don't move faster than your opponent, um, because that gap will just continue to expand, or not continue to expand. It will stay the same length if it needs to be.
Yes and no.
Um,
I
Yes.
think that
Can you guys
objectives
hear me?
kind of act. Yes, we can.
yeah, yeah,
We can.
Okay,
I
good.
think that
Sorry.
objectives kind of act like a rubber band in a weird way, where you can move away from them, but like the tension gets a lot higher the further away you move from like objectives you might need to move towards. And so sometimes just forcing your opponent to like keep moving away from the objective, like you can afford to take some losses, you can afford to take shots, but like if they're continuing just to move back, like sometimes, especially as the game gets later and later, like that could win you a game outright.
well,
I also think closing the gap's kind of an interesting discussion because now we're in kind of a new world where we have this CIS core that can move 3 times, and it kind of changes all those measurements. Like all those measurements that we had as far as like kiting these units are like, oh, well, that unit can now move twice and shoot, or just move 3 times to get onto that objective, or and so we kind of have to plan for that differently now.
Yeah,
yeah. But yeah, no, I think what Tyler's saying makes actually a lot of sense. That I've kind of been skirting around is that like you can get the tempo. Um, as I said before, it's just like the tempo is really really important in terms of these lists that are closing the gap, because as you've said multiple times, you can just force your opponent to be where you want them to be, just by holding an objective, etc., etc. Um, okay, I think we've talked about closing the gap and kiting a fair bit. What do you guys look for in flanking units? Like what? So when and where and with what do you flank with, basically? Like,
I think the most obvious example is speeder
yeah,
bikes, um, because they are really fast, and usually their dice pools are good or pretty solid. And because of their action efficiency, they can usually like end a round by triple moving with their compulsory move, of course. And then the next round, they can probably even do a compulsory move into a good position and aim and shoot, or just straight up do a double move into a shot. And then if you're stat riders, you can give them like link targeting array, and they already have aims. But I think that the way you flank, and the thing you should always be looking for if you're intending to flank, is out of cover shots, which has gotten a lot harder to do. And I think that's kind of why we see less and less flanking units, which again are mostly bikes. Just because part of their I feel like part of their built-in cost was into the fact that they could flank really effectively and get out of cover shots and just be really, really hard to counter. But now just getting things out of cover in general is really, really hard, and so you see a little bit less of them, but they can still be very strong on certain maps.
Yeah, I
Um,
would second that. I mean, I use swoops, so it's a little bit different, but it's the same concept. I use them to flank, and part of it is they get that overrun to get those out of cover shots.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I've completely lost my train of thought. I apologize for that,
it's off
but
the tracks.
just completely derailed myself. So
Well,
besides speeder bikes, well, when we're looking at something besides speeder bikes, because speeder bikes are the easy answer. Is there like times when, like, let's say you've got your static gun line in like all your B1s and like Bosk and stuff? Is there times that you look for flanks with that kind of stuff, or do you really want to stick to the game plan there? Like,
it really just depends. I think I know what you're saying, and I think a lot of it comes down to really deployments. Um, so I think that Empire has a couple really great options with like ISF or Inferno Squad mostly that you can deploy in a very, very advantageous spot. I would say Pathfinders, but Pathfinders suck. But
Whoa,
but
whoa!
hey, don't hate.
they're pretty bad. They're pretty
But
bad.
yeah, they don't have the sort of I guess what I'm trying to say is they don't have the sort of offensive threat that like an Inferno Squad poses. Like I never feel like a Pathfinder threatens to like peel models off the table nearly as quickly as like an Inferno or even just a regular ISF does. But then you might find yourself if you have a pretty static gun line if you're running like Disarray or something. I think Disarray is a good example of you can basically place any sort of basic unit in the corner, and they could actually kind of move up the sideline and get some pretty advantageous shots and force a bit of positioning, errors or just positioning that you'd like um, by your opponent.
Yeah, I think I would agree with pretty much most everything that Tyler said. I mean, flanking units that I can think of are going to be um, fast units like bikes. So, like when you're not talking about bikes, it's going to be Mandalorians. That's a big one. I think that's something that just hasn't been used a whole lot, but when they are used for flanking pieces, they hit hard. And I think Geonosians are going to kind of supplement some of that role as well. Um, so they're going to be able to triple move to get to position, jump up, and do a giant out of cover shot with their big explosive range 2 from a height 1 or whatever it is. And so I think fast units that can really move to get in position and then hit hard are going to be those flanking units.
Yeah, and I think Geonosians Adam and I actually just played a game like last week or so, and I was running a Geonosian list, and he had a really, really good line of sight blocker on his side. That my Geonosians, because of the way they flanked, were actually they pretty much completely took it out of the game for him.
Yeah.
Because had he tried to move towards it, he would have moved right into the Geonosians, and they actually ended up taking that line of sight blocker. It was on his half of the table.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It was.
so with 3 speed 2 moves, like those things are so fast that if
So
you come
fast.
across and see them, they're, I think, one of, if not the best flanking non-bike unit in the game.
There's not really much else that's like up there besides bikes, because there's nothing else that can so freely have 3 actions, because we needed to give everything free jump 3 or whatever
Well,
it
and
is.
I think there's a few Mandalorian characters, but like you said, it's mostly speed 3 characters. It's going to be a Boba Fett, it's going to be a Din if you actually see him out there in the wild, a Sabine, those kind of things.
Yeah, so it just kind of goes back to being able to not only move fast, but like actually be able to kill stuff too. Because it's like,
Yeah.
you can't really, so like with Geos, you can't really throw a naked unit on the side and expect it to be able to threaten, because their dice pool is not good enough to by themselves, unless they've got like the upgrades, like they're like a 5-6 man unit, right? Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of like the other thing is, as Tyler was kind of mentioning with our game, it's area control. is kind of like the other times that you should be looking at flanking versus just sticking with your gun line. I think because it's like there's going to be games where you need to control those side points and everything, but there's also games where it's better to just shove all 800 points down your opponent's throat, right?
I think you bring up a pretty good point there with the difference between flanking to kill and flanking to simply disrupt. I think there's
Yeah.
actually a pretty big distinction there where, sometimes you might flank with something not necessarily planning on it killing and like pulling a bunch of weight itself in the victory point or in the kill point game. Uh, you just kind of want to do something, to keep your opponent from moving units towards a certain line of sight blocker or like from a certain position that you feel like might be strong.
I'll be honest,
Sometimes,
I didn't think that far ahead because all I do is kill things in this game. I win by the dice, lose by the dice.
Yeah.
But
well,
No, and I think
I actually have done this quite a bit with Magna Guards. I think Magna Guards is a good example of a unit that like I've put them in spots where it's like if you want to move to that position or that line of sight blocker, I can charge you, and you don't want that.
yeah, that's fair.
What are you saying, Matt?
Yeah, I think controlling an area is just as important as killing things. That's partly why the reason that I play Sabine so much is that she locks down an area almost better than most other units, being able to threaten the explosions, to have the whipcord to lock down a single unit, especially a key piece, is big. Because I mean that's more of a control. Whereas if you've got like a Boba Fett with a flamethrower and he wants to hit a flank, that threat is very different. It's, hey, I'm going to lose this 6-man core unit because they just got roasted with a Pierce shot. So that's a very different ball game. But there's leverage to both of those, and it's just about knowing kind of what that leverage is and being able to respond to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know if we've got anything else to touch on for mobility play. I think we've just kind of hammered down everything, right? Do you guys have any other thoughts on this?
So mobility actually I think comes in different forms. So obviously I think that we would all agree that the standard movement of a unit is just a speed 2 with no extra actions. That seems to be pretty standard. And every unit
Yep.
that is slower than that either has reasons why they're slower, like you'll take a Darth Vader or snow troopers get steady, or things that are faster than that are obviously very mobile. Um, but I think that also some play can be put into there when you're factoring in courage of a unit. So I actually don't see any courage 1 units as being overly mobile unless they're droids, right? Basically things that can be
Cheers.
suppressed. Um, but things that can be suppressed or avoid being suppressed and still get action economy, or things that, like you said, geos, like geos can still jump and do an action if they're suppressed. Or if you just have things that are courage 2 that just won't get slowed down, so they can always do a move shoot, or they can always do a double move, or whatever the case may be. I think
Yeah.
that actually kind of plays into it, and I think that's why you see like if you played against like Pike spam with the capos and the units, because I think that's the best iteration of them, because of all the courage 2, they are much more mobile than you think they are because they're never really getting suppressed that much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because that's a lot of the threat of the Black Sun list is the fact that they have Dauntless. So you can't slow them down because they're still coming right straight to your face. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Shall we talk a little bit about tournaments and what to bring to them and what to prepare for, considering that only the biggest one ever is coming up in 10 days, 8 days, something like that, 9 days. I jumped completely around it. No, that's
So
10. I can't count. It's just 10 days from the
yeah,
time of recording.
yeah.
Well, I
Most
think,
people will probably be traveling a week from today, which is
Yeah,
today's
basically.
Tuesday, so it's
Tuesday
not
night.
much time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think a big thing for most people to probably make note of is you need a printed copy of your list. Just
Oh,
so
is that
that's key.
official?
That is official. So I say that, and Adam's like, "Yo, crap."
I'm looking up the Adepticon packet really quick
Let me
because
let
I
me say
didn't remember
this.
that.
Yeah, let me say this. So this is actually an Adepticon thing, but I actually think that's a really good point for just tournaments in general.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
I
just
think it's
tournaments in
just easy
general,
for your
making
I
sure
opponent.
don't
that
know.
yeah, just bring something to identify to your opponent. But in this case, it needs to be printed. So just making sure you have something to identify to your opponent. Hey, here's all of the details on my list that I need to know, that kind of thing. Um, so that's, just check the player guide, the player packet, whatever it may be, whatever event you're going to, that's going to have most of the details that you need. If you're unsure, check with the TO. Make sure you have your minis. Make sure you have glue. I mean, that's usually a good on hands thing is super glue, because things fall, things break, it happens. Um, but the other thing is
Yeah.
pack snacks. Yeah, snacks, water, things. It's going to be a long day. You may not think about it now, but when you're doing 3 games in a row or 4 games in a row,
I was like,
you need to keep that blood sugar up. Keep just water in your system. Last thing we want is someone collapsing at a table just because they're dehydrated.
I think we're planning on playing at Worlds is 4 rounds on Friday, which I think with the tournament bracket is at least 12 hours of Legion, right? Like
Probably more.
start to finish. I mean, like not including like lunch and stuff, but like you're literally
Oh,
playing
gotcha.
Legion for at most for 12 hours. You might finish early, but like you're playing for 12 hours. So like that's just something to think
Yep.
about. Um, it's going to be a long day. Um,
I think another good tidbit is never get ready the night before the morning of. And most people say the night
Mm.
before, like, and kind of question that. Start putting things in your travel case like throughout the week,
it just
because
sounds.
yeah, exactly. And if some of your army gets packed the night before, that's totally fine. But I think that a lot of the times I'll be in such a rush trying to pack everything at the same time, I'll always forget something. And I know a lot of people will probably run into the same scenario. Um, and also just know that like there's actually a strong chance you forget something. And just kind of contingency for it a little bit. Maybe bring some extra barricades. Maybe bring both your payloads instead of just one. Like I don't know. Like
I remember that from last. I don't know if you remember Worlds last year, Tyler. But I have a second painted Rebel Boba in my collection because someone forgot their Rebel Boba they painted the night before and was like super proud of to show off. It was
This
sitting on
episode
my yeah. It was just
may or
sitting
may
on my
not be put on for Adam.
yeah. I mean, like I've been taking notes this whole time. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah. I was just gonna say like preparing the night before just sounds like bad travel habits. I'm not gonna lie.
Yep.
No offense. No offense,
Yeah, and even
Tyler.
if you are doing it the night before, just have a mental list already of everything, or a physical list of everything that you're going to go and literally go through and check it. Like one of the things, I mean, my travel buddies right now, we've been like messaging each other back and forth, like, hey, we're getting like a Costco run. Who needs what? And it's like, okay, chips, PB&Js, that kind of thing. My go-to tournament snack is usually cuties, because tangerines have really high citrus, just keeps you going really well. Also helps keep that hydration and all that stuff going. So, yep.
Yeah. Um, any other tidbits for prepping for tournaments? Or you guys just want to talk about our list really quick and what we expect to see?
I mean, do we want to do like gameplay prep for tournaments?
I mean, we can do that too.
I think that it just really depends on the tournament. Like, I don't think people should really be prepping all that much for like local tournaments. I think that local scenes should be a little more casual. Now, if there's invites on the line, I understand wanting to bring a list that's a little more seasoned, but all the
Mm-hmm.
time, like I'll bring a tournament or I'll bring a list to a tournament that's a lot more casual, or maybe models I haven't played before. Um, because I just don't get to play very much like regular play, and tournaments are kind of my outlet of regular play in a sense. So I think for more serious quote unquote tournaments, it's also just a good idea in general to not even sweat it that much. And that sounds bad. I kind of talked about this in my article for Worlds, but I feel like a lot of people take these tournaments really, really seriously. And even though it's like a serious tournament, like I said this exact quote in my article, which is half of the players playing will lose the very first game they play. Like mathematically, that is 100%
Mhm.
accurate. And it's like to get really worked up thinking like, oh my god, I need to go 3-0, I need to go 4-0. Just go in there and say I'm going to try my best, and whatever comes of it comes of it. And I'm not going to beat myself up for going 2-2. I'm not going to beat myself up for doing less than what I think my standard should be. And I think that you're going to come away playing every game much happier because again, it's a game, and there shouldn't be this like, this mindset of like I have to win or else.
Do you guys? How
Yeah.
much do you guys prep for tournaments? Like in terms of like when it's the World Championship and like these tournaments that you actually do want to prep for. Is there like? I feel like we've already talked about this a little bit, but like, hard rule for like how many games? Any of that?
Mm.
Like just how much you prep?
Yeah,
I'm sure
Matt,
my
how much
answer
do
is
you
different
prep?
than
I'm
Tyler.
curious. Well, so
I
Adam and I
think
did talk about this a little bit. So I'm curious. I don't think you were there when we did. So I'm curious what you had to say.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more about how well do I know my list, because then I'm going to be able to respond to a threat differently. And essentially, my strategy usually for tournaments is, do I know the list like the back of my hand? So that way, when my strategy and my tactics goes to hell, because it will, eventually, I can respond accordingly because I know how my army functions. It's no different than like, an army general who gets to know the strengths and the weaknesses of their army. They're going to be able to respond that better. I can send troops out better. I can respond better when my flank collapses. So that's the big one for me. I usually like no less than 10 reps with a list. And 10 is a pretty low minimum. Like I'm usually sporting about 25 reps with a list. Now, granted, for those listening, I don't play nearly as much Legion as I used to, but at one point I was playing like 7 games a week. So yeah,
Must be
Tyler's rolling
nice.
his eyes at me.
Must be nice.
Yeah, I have a very loving, awesome wife who makes that flexible because keeps my mental health sane with 3 kids and everything that's going on in my world. So, but yeah, so I normally would go at like, over to Brian's or whatever and play 3 games after all the kids have gone to bed. Parent life. So, but yeah, I would say for me, knowing the list like the back of my hand is the biggest thing. And for you, whatever that looks like, whatever that may be, like Tyler, that might be different for you, whatever the reps you prefer. Adam, same thing.
I don't play.
But I think for me,
I
it's
don't play
it's
extra
about
games.
10. 10 is my number.
I
Probably
think
a minimum.
that's fair.
In a previous cast, I think we kind of talked about like how many games we should play to prep with like a specific list. I actually said 3,
Oh
and
yeah.
3 it's a really low number. And the criteria I said is that you want to play just one game in general against any list drawn out of a hat, and then you want to play against 2 skews, either like a gunline skew and then like a really aggressive skew or whatever. I think those are the 2 best personally. But yeah, like I think 3 games is like fair enough to where you kind of figure out some of the command card holes you might have. You might figure out some of the upgrade holes that you might want to change. Um, Beyond that 3 games, I think that the list changes less and less in terms of like you might have a niche thing that you want to change eventually down the road, but it's not some list altering change. It's usually something minor. You want to switch a recon to an E gear, something along those lines. Um,
Yeah,
and so like
I think
to get a list to like 95% efficiency, I think it's like 3 games personally.
yeah, and I think that's probably fair. For me, I tend to push into like we all have our different strategies. Like Tyler prefers to play more a little bit longer range. Brian tends to be throw my units into your face. I tend to try to play less seen, harder units. I mean, I play primarily rebels, but like 2 years ago at Adepticon, I brought Jin. Last year at Gen Con, I was bringing like Lando and playing a crazy list around that. And so I tend to try to play lists that take a lot more timing sensitive. Um, and so like this year I've got and I can say this now because I've been playing it for like 6 months, but I've got like Sabine and Ahsoka, and the timing on both of those and making sure that they get the most efficiency out of both of them is very key. And so a lot of times it takes me more reps just to make sure that I'm not fumbling plays. And that's the big one for me, is making sure that I'm not fumbling my own plays. Then I can focus on reading my opponent.
You know what the most fun way to prep for a tournament is? Change your list 2 days before and figure it out as you
That's
go.
the Adam
Um,
method.
I was like, that is very much the point I'm at, because like I'm very much considering bringing Inquisitors to Worlds. Um, but
How many reps
Use
do you
the
have with Inquisitors, Adam?
I have played 2 games of Inquisitors on TTS a couple months ago.
That doesn't even
Um,
hit the Tyler 3. Doesn't even
I
hit the
know.
Tyler 3
I've
minimum.
got I've got 10 days. I've got 10 days. I've got 3 days before I have to submit list, but like I got 10 days to figure it
Well,
out.
I mean, if Matt could play 7 games in a week in 10 days, you could probably
Yeah,
play
That's what
what,
I'm
like
saying. I'm on spring
12?
break. I got nothing to do.
yeah. I
But
said, I
no,
don't know what you're doing
don't.
Friday, but we could probably get in 3.
I was like, yeah, don't change your list. Resist the temptations. Don't do what I do, because I've consistently lost every tournament I've gone to, quite hard. When I've changed. But yeah. But speaking of lists, do you guys want to talk a little bit about lists that we're bringing to Worlds really quickly? Touch a little bit on that.
Tyler's
Yeah.
smiling.
Start.
Like,
I-
have you
I'll-
decided, Tyler? I know you were waffling a little.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
so I so I've been playing
oh,
this iteration of a like boss CAD gun line with Magnus for a while. And I was destined to play the same list, removing CAD and putting 2 Geos in for Worlds. And so I played a very pivotal game against Adam, and he was playing Experimental Droids, because I think Experimental Droids is a pretty tough matchup for a more gunliney list like what I had. And what I found against a gun line that was as potent as mine is that if I get stuck on a table that is even slightly open with Geonosians, they will evaporate. If I also have to
Mm,
face like some pure spam, frankly, like I think Empire and sometimes even Rebels can duplicate this really, really well, the Magnus fall apart. And usually what I lean on really heavily is that I have 2 repair bots on my list that can just keep bringing Magnus back. But when I lose like 3 or 4 wounds in a single shot, it really just kind of like makes that unit inefficient the rest of the game, because it's like, oh, like the whole idea is that they're kind of getting plinked down, and I can keep bringing them back with repairs. And the reason that they're getting plinked is that I can maintain the range for band, and I can limit the amount of dice being thrown back my way. Um,
mm.
so with all that being said, I am succumbing to the hype train, as the kids say, and I am probably bringing experimental droids, the 3BXs. I'm bringing 2B2 Haas, and I'm bringing a B1s, one with a rocket, one with a sniper, and a couple repair bots. And I've played some games with it, and it is, I mean, I wanted to play a test game against Pikes, because that was originally my absolute worst matchup, and I damn near tabled the list in like 5 rounds. And I barely lost any bodies, and I was like, oh, this feels cool. Uh,
so I just want to be clear. I got made fun of for waffling, but Tyler right here has just admitted to it as well.
Well, see,
So
I flipped the waffle to the other side, and the other side's cooking now. Whereas your waffle's somewhere getting pressed, and maybe it's half made, maybe it's half not. You're not sure yet.
I
But
assumed
no,
his waffle was still mix.
I was gonna make a pancake.
Yeah.
yeah, no, I'm pretty set now on experimental droids. I also think that um, I don't know if I mentioned this in my article or not. I don't think I did, but I think that them trying to go from tables, or enough tables to supply like 128, which I think last Worlds was maybe 130, to now trying to supply that many tables, like going from like 64 to like 130 tables. I think that's like a crazy task. And I just have this opinion in my mind that some of the tables might be a little sparse. Um, I don't know. I could be totally wrong, and I want to be wrong, but I just have this feeling that that might be what happens, because it's. I mean, that's a pretty crazy task, if you ask me.
It's a lot of work
That's
in
a
a
lot of
very,
text.
very small time. And I can I would say I probably agree with you, Tyler. I hope that we are wrong on that, and mostly for the sheer fact that I know that we have a stellar community that would have been willing to help out and throw tables their way. Um, so maybe we're wrong, and I super hope we aren't. And if we aren't wrong, then, or I hope we are wrong, but if we aren't, maybe it's just a learning experience, and next year they can kind of pull the community a little bit better and plan. And so yeah.
I will say that the pictures, like the updates or whatever they've been putting on Facebook, have been really encouraging to me, at least. For seeing everything
It's
that they're
stellar
putting
looking
together in such a
terrain.
short amount of time. Yeah, like it
Yeah,
all looks
I mean,
really
the paint
really
jobs
good.
look great. It all looks like amazing 3D print work. So
There was also just a lot that was there's just a lot of terrain that they just pumped out because like originally when we were talking about it, I remember looking at it and be like, oh, there's going to be no line of sight blockers at Worlds. But like that is definitely not the case anymore, which I'm very thankful for.
yeah, well, it's just going to come down to a matter of how many can they pump out to put on each table. Like, is it going to be the 25%? Is it going to be 35%? Like, I think a lot of us are kind of almost in the community used to seeing more of 35% coverage on tables
Yeah.
anymore, even with the new cover changes and all of that. And so it's a matter of, are they even going to make the 25%, or will it be more like 15% coverage?
Yeah, it's I don't know. It's just a worry I have that if even 1/3 of the tables are open, that gives me a 33% chance with my previous list of getting put into a
Yep.
terrible matchup. And
Yeah, B1s and Geonosians, it'd be rough. Yeah,
yeah,
without
See,
cover.
see, that's why you guys are doing it wrong. You should just bring your own line of sight blockers, all your own, cover. Like my
What are you
list, which
bringing,
will
Adam?
I'm
Transition.
bringing something similar that I brought to Cherokee in that I've got Boba Fett, R2D2, and then 3 Saboteur strike teams because Saboteurs are fun. And nobody knows how to play against them still. It's really entertaining to watch people sweat bullets over it. Um, I'm also bringing just one unit of Rebel Troopers with the SX and then a DLT Captain, or sorry, Captain Trooper and Frags. One Rebel Trooper unit with just a DLT, one Fleet Trooper unit with just a Repair Bot, and then a unit of Naked Ewok Skirmishers. And then we've got 2 buses. That was the big change that I've made since Tyler has shown me the light. Um, I've changed over from one land speeder, one bus, to 2 buses. Both of them have the
Hmm.
quad laser, unorthodox tactician, and then onboard comms. And then one of the buses has Shriv for my field commander and Shriv because Shriv is amazing, and a Gonk droid on that same bus, which is
Hey, Adam,
uh
is that list
what
painted?
I believe it or not, I have one thing left to paint. It's a
Is it the
bus.
bus?
It's a bus.
Okay.
I have
Well, good
acquired
thing
my
we did an
second
episode
bus.
about that.
I know, right? It was. I painted my first one since that point in time, and I'm gonna continue doing that. I do want to do it like the same way because like it'll match, but like at the same time, I think it'd just be hysterical to put like kind of like a wrap job on the bus. That's just the
Hmm.
unorthodox tactician card, just repeated, and just have that as the paint job. I
that would
don't
be
know
funny.
how. I have no idea how to do it, but like I have 10 days to figure it out.
Mod
So
Podge and
we'll,
lots of cards. You
yeah,
just paper mache that
yeah.
puppy.
I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. Um, but if it does happen and it pans out, it'll be freaking awesome. Um, but yeah, that's what I'm bringing. We'll see how it does.
Yeah,
I
I
might
talked
Hmm.
Adam off of the land speeder just because I think that the bus having an extra wound or 2 wounds
2
actually,
wounds and then full armor.
and full armor. I think well, and the line of sight blocking potential. I think it just gives him a little bit more versatility, um, especially for
Yeah.
objectives. I think the land speeder just kind of dies. In fact, I played a game with Adam while he was using his land speeder, and I had a BX droid one shot his land speeder.
Well, you did also roll
Oof.
12 for 12 on a BX shot, so
Oh,
there is that.
well, I wasn't gonna
Yeah.
say that, but
Yeah. Did you
yeah,
have
no,
a? Was that with or without the gonk droid,
There was no
or
gunk because it was
the sorry? Yeah, the
it
shields.
was the no, there was no shields on it. It was just because it was the build that I usually do. That was the land speeder with like the unstable R5 and then the rocket and the ion.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I
that
can't.
build, so I was like more damage.
As much as I love the land speeders, I can't really get to a position where I feel okay taking them without the shields anymore, just for that reason.
Yeah.
I mean, 6 health, armor 2 isn't what it used to be. So
Yeah, it's just I still like them a lot. It's just like I feel like the list is going in a direction that I don't have the points or the playstyle for it to work. So
yep,
I would rather just jam another bus down your gullet and make you deal with that instead. 'Cause
seems
buses are
good.
fun. Buses, I mean, like I don't remember if I said it before, but like buses, the bus I brought to Cherokee almost single handedly won me 2 games. It won me one of the games
Mm.
by itself, and it almost won me the second game that I lost in Kentucky Dan. So I figure if there's 2 of them, that's twice as many games, right? That's how that works.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, buses are good, man. I think
yeah,
it's a good call.
Buses.
it's
I don't know
solid.
why buses don't see more play, but
What
anyway,
about
I
you,
think
Matt?
they're hard. Yeah. Yeah. So my list is the same list I've been playing, with some slight tweaks. Like if you saw our Michigan GT article, I actually won Michigan GT with this list. So it is a variation of that. It is generic officer. It is Sabine, Ahsoka, 2 naked fleet troopers, 2 rebel squads with the SX-21s, captains, situational awareness, prepared supplies, and frag grenades on them. So they are like fully kitted. They have every upgrade that they can have, and they're still only like 70 points or something like that. Um, cheap boys, and they hit hard. And then a squad of Ewoks and 2 swoop bikes. And so the funny thing about the list is it doesn't. I mean, it's nothing super glamorous. It doesn't have a whole lot of like long range firepower. It's mostly close. And I think Adam can probably back me up on this. It averages about 500 kill points every single game.
it's kind of
Um,
gross.
like yeah, it just once Sabine and Ahsoka can both get in, they just start the lawnmower turns on. And whatever they don't kill, the swoop bikes come in and start chipping away, being able to shoot, overrun, pick off a unit here, pick off a unit here, and just kind of clean up the things that they don't finish off.
And then
And
there's
if
yeah, it's like
you're and if you're worried
I was
about those,
you,
then the SX-21s come up. And then
yep.
the fleets are there to
Mhm.
kind of be able to lock down some lanes, take standbys with aims, so it can push you into them if you're not careful. And so there's a lot of flexibility with this list in getting in really quickly, and then hitting you in the flanks. So, and of course, you got Ewoks to play, just some objectives, throw a few extra shots, and just be annoying.
Yeah, I mean, no qualms about any of us sharing our list, right? Because if you try and counter us, we'll take it as a compliment, right?
Nah, I'll just post this on Friday. So for all those listening, it's probably Friday. So
Yeah, I mean, we can post it tomorrow. Just chat on people, just be alphas.
Hey, listen, I'm gonna
That
let you
was
know what my
cringy.
list is, and I'm still gonna dunk on you. So you know what? Get ready.
wow, wow, so much,
So
wow,
aggressive.
No, I'm
wham.
kidding.
Alright.
Tyler, don't take things too seriously.
Yeah, that's
Tyler's
right.
just Tyler doesn't care about winning. Tyler just cares about dunking on you.
Yeah, I'll smash your models if you beat me.
Tyler's fully
Alright.
prepared to flip tables.
I might have
Ah!
lost the battle. I will win the
Before
war.
do we have any closing thoughts before Tyler starts breaking computers?
No, just
I
Anything?
think I gave life.
genuinely go and have fun at Worlds. I think it's going to be a really, really great time. Go interact with the community and just meet some people that you might recognize their names and haven't met them, face to face.
That's a yeah.
Give everybody a high five, say hi, whatever. Just it'll be a great time.
And if you're not going to Worlds, let's use that as a good excuse to go to any other big tournaments by you. These are always so much fun. Um, was like, that's a pretty good piece of advice to leave off on. Go to tournaments. It's a lot of fun. Everyone's happy. Everyone's chill. Everyone likes talking to people. So yeah, go out there and play Legion. Yeah.